All right. Hello, Tara.
Hello, how are you, Dimitri?
Very good, very good. I don't know why. It's like you said you're American, but
Yes,
every time you say hello, Dimitri, it's like like it feels like you have some kind of Eastern European accent.
I'm trying so hard tonight to make it American sounding because when I first was speaking to you, I kept rolling the R too much,
Yeah.
like Dimitri, and
No,
I said, no, I have to stop this. So I'm really trying to make it more American
no, no,
sounding.
no, no. Do it. It's so cool. It's really cool. I'm saying it as a compliment. Can you actually
Oh,
say
okay.
"rrr"?
Thank
Can you
you.
say "rrr"? Can you roll
Huh?
your R? Can you roll your R's? Can you say "rrr"? Can you roll your R's?
Sure.
Oh wow! So how'd you learn?
Rrr. Oh, yeah.
How'd you learn that? Is that part of the breathing? Breathing?
I don't know. I think there's a genetic component to it, right? To the tongue position, maybe, or something? Because I
There you
know
go.
even there's some native Spanish speakers, for example, who cannot roll their R, even though it's an inherent part of the language. It's really
Hmm.
interesting. So I don't know if there's something in the actual tongue connector that allows certain people to do it and some people to not do it. I don't know. It's really interesting.
That's true. There's a lot of Russian speakers that cannot do it. That's true.
Is it true? Yeah,
Yeah.
weird. So interesting.
All right. So Tara is a breathing expert. So how about we start? But you just introduce yourself and tell about what you do and maybe how you got there. Let's start there.
Okay, so my name is Tara Bianca. I own a company called BE Light Transformative Therapy, and the main focus of my work is always holistic health and wellness. And the main focal points are therapeutic breathwork, which we'll be talking about today. I also was a manual therapist for a long time, a body worker for almost 20 years. So I have a big background in sort of anatomy and physiology, manual therapy, therapeutic body work. So I teach on my YouTube channel, I teach some self-massage techniques also for people. And then I explore maybe slightly more esoteric topics than what you're interested in, Dimitri. So like I do a little bit of sound healing with people. We talk about frequencies and things like that. And I also do a little bit of mindset work with people. But the main focus of my work online at this point is breath coaching for sure, and in particular, functional breathing for daily life and performance.
Hmm. Awesome. And you focus on, I guess you focus on Buteyko and Oxygen Advantage. Those are the methods that
Sure.
you.
So
Okay.
those are
So
my main methods for sure. I've studied other breathing techniques, but Oxygen Advantage and Buteyko are my main focal points right now.
okay, can I ask you please to talk a little bit about Buteyko? Because I think it's,
Sure.
it's just an interesting. I think he's an interesting character and interesting how. And I think when I talk to you, I think you know a little bit about this, and you can talk to
Yeah.
this better than me. So could you do that a little bit?
Yeah. So so I'm not an expert on his biography, but Konstantin Buteyko was a really interesting man. He was a medical doctor, and towards the end of his life, he was really suffering with, I don't remember if it was like respiratory failure or heart disease or something like that. And the story goes that he was in the hospital and he caught his reflection or something in the window or in a mirror, and he just saw himself like depleted, his posture deformed, and he noticed he was breathing so heavy and so shallowly. And he just made this connection of, this is not helping me, right? This is not helping me to recover. And he started to play around with his breathing in the hospital, working on correcting his kind of mechanics, how he's bringing the breath in, working on slowing down his breath, working on closing his mouth and making his breathing nasal, and really working on deepening it. And in slowing down the breath so much, I think what he discovered experientially was that he was getting way better oxygen uptake and way better oxygen distribution throughout his body. His coloring started to come back, and he started to kind of heal himself from this whatever disease process he was going through at the time. And so after going through this, he realized, okay, breathing is really critical for human health. And it's kind of this unspoken thing that we don't really talk about in the health field. We kind of take it for granted because it's such an obvious part of our day. We don't have to think about it, right? It's one of these unconscious processes in our body. And so Buteyko actually started to open clinics, I think, all over kind of Russia, Ukraine, that area. And he was supposedly curing people of all kinds of diseases, working with the breathing. Um, in the West more. So then he also went on to experiment. I was telling you this on the phone the other day, Dimitri, that he was experimenting with like telepathy, ESP, and kind of going into this other terrain. I think of him as more of a modern Tesla, quite honestly. Like he was playing around with different technologies that are not necessarily accepted in the mainstream. And he was even on the CIA watch list at some point because they really understood that he was starting to understand how to read people's minds. And he had sort of this technology using mirrors in a room where he could really teach other people also how to read minds. So he was a really fascinating dude. Um, and then his work got taken up in the West by someone named Patrick McEwen, who's an
Mhm.
Irish guy. And he's a breathing expert. He wrote The Oxygen Advantage. And he discovered Buteyko's work because he had suffered his whole childhood with horrible breathing, mouth breathing, asthma, allergies, insomnia, horrible focus, couldn't concentrate. His performance was being impacted. His memory was being impacted. He felt like he wasn't engaged in his life and he was suffering constantly with this breathing issue. And he had bad asthma. And when he discovered the Buteyko method, he basically cured himself of asthma by correcting his breathing. And so Patrick went on to start bringing Buteyko method to sort of the West, right? The Western
Mhm.
hemisphere. And then he took it one step further. So the Oxygen Advantage is kind of a spin-off of Buteyko. It has all of the basic principles of functional breathing that we learn in Buteyko method, but it starts to add this performance piece, this athletic piece, this focus
Mhm.
and concentration piece. So the resilience and adaptability piece. So it just takes it to a little bit of another level, which is why a lot of athletes prefer to work with Oxygen Advantage because
Mhm.
it has that extra intensity to it, if you will.
Mhm. Yeah, nice. Just to recap a couple of things that, if I heard you correctly, I think Buteyko, he kind of discovered that, if I can summarize, is less is more as far as breathing.
Right.
And I love, and I
100%.
I love this idea because we kind of discovering this in all aspects of life. Food,
Right.
less is more,
Right.
right? Any kind of comfort, less is more, from all kinds of, from philosophical point of view, from health point of view, from longevity point of view. So I just
Yes.
love how it all fits in. And another little point is that, yeah, you kind of mentioned that he is kind of character, and he kind of went a little bit nuts, like, come on, mind reading. But I just want to say this. I used to be very close-minded, and I used to dismiss immediately. But then I changed my mind. And even if the person is a little bit nuts in some aspects, it's like a package. It comes in a package, and you don't have to accept 100%. But a lot of for a genius, you have to be a little bit crazy to be a genius. So I know a few of those characters in among the scientists and in real life, and I've come to appreciate them. And so
Yeah, I
we
mean,
can learn a lot.
I don't think of him as crazy. I just think of him as thinking outside the box and thinking at a
Mhm.
level that maybe you and I aren't prepared to think at, you know? It's
That's
just a different
of
way of
course.
thinking and a
Yeah.
different way of opening yourself up to possibility. So I actually admire him. I think he was a cool character. But I love what
Mhm.
you said, Dimitri, because in holistic health and wellness, we sort of have a motto that modernity, this modern life, that people are literally dying of comfort and convenience, right? So
Yeah.
it's real. I love what you said about less is more, and it is so true. I often compare this kind of chronic overbreathing that we see in society, this like fast-paced hyperventilation, with overeating. So I think like all the research around intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating very much goes hand in hand with this reduced breathing practice. That was a perfect comparison that you made for
Mhm.
sure.
Okay, so let's it's a good segue right there. So the Buteyko, he probably he just discovered it probably by observing his own body and observing. But can you go a little bit? I don't know if he himself developed a little bit of more of a science behind this, like scientific basis, or maybe it was done after him. Is there so for example, I like all these ideas about the carbon dioxide and all this and that, which is not immediately apparent. Can you go into that or any other science behind it?
Yeah, sure. So, I don't know if we have direct research from Buteyko. It's a good point. And there's a couple things. I don't know if he has the formal research. I don't know if some of his research was destroyed, or I don't know if maybe the Russian government is holding the research. I don't know if it's well dispersed, quite honestly. But there have been a lot of breathing researchers since him who have been working with these ideas and trying to hash them out, so to speak. So there's a lot of people. Xavier Worons, I don't know what country he's from, but he did a lot of studies with athletes in particular and testing what we'd call hypoventilation techniques. So reduced breathing or breath holding techniques and how they affect kind of pH in the body, how playing with the blood gases, like you said, oxygen and carbon dioxide, affect what's happening in the muscle compartments, in the muscle tissue, and how that can then go on to impact performance. So we do have some data, and I'm going to say outright, to be fully transparent, there's a lot of breathing studies, but all of these studies are done on very small groups, right? So the numbers are not big, but I think when you look at it collectively as a whole, the research, it starts to reveal itself, right? So a lot of studies on small demographics, but when you put it together, it starts to make sense. So so the studies are really showing that there can be a lot of benefit for performance when you do what we call hypoxic training. So reducing the amount of oxygen in the body. And then so we call that hypoxic training, hypoxic low oxygen, but coupled with, in particular, hypercapnic training. So capnic just means CO2, right? So this is low oxygen, high CO2. This is one way of holding your breath or one way of practicing reduced breathing. There are other ways that you can do breath holds as well that do not elevate CO2. So there's a difference. You have to hold your breath in a particular way. And I think, Dimitri, you were telling me with your students, you're holding your breath after an exhale. And that's really the way that we teach it in Oxygen Advantage. And that is the way to do hypoxic, low oxygen, hypercapnic, high CO2 breath holding. So what are some of the benefits of working with the CO2? Well, how does CO2 affect the body? CO2 directly affects the pH of the blood, right? It disturbs the acid-base balance. So when you have higher CO2, it creates a more acidic environment. And when you have lower CO2, it creates more of an alkaline environment. And the thing about the human body, I hope you can still hear me. The thing about the human body is that your blood likes to be very consistent with its pH. It has a very small window of pH that is acceptable. So it likes to hover around 7.35 to 7 maybe 4.5. So it's slightly on the alkaline side. But any disruption beyond those parameters, and you're going to have a physiological response. Your blood is going to find a way to either buffer it to make it less acidic or excrete bicarbonate from the body to make it more alkaline, right? To make it more alkaline. So you have a very small window. So as CO2 starts to rise in the body, your pH actually goes down and you get a more acidic environment. And that sounds like it would be bad, and it would be long term. But you had brought up the concept to me earlier, Dimitri, about training versus competition. And so this is kind of a type of training, hypoxic training. We're doing this conscientiously, short term, consistently, over a progressive period of time to create a positive adaptation for a desired outcome that we want, right? And so when we train this long term, this hypoxic, hypercapnic style of training, there's a few different theories about what's happening. One theory that we usually mention in the Oxygen Advantage is that when you expose the body to more higher acidity levels like that more frequently, under conscious control, there's some idea that the buffering capacity within the muscle compartment itself gets better. So how does that transpose to performance? That means you don't feel that acidic burn as quickly. So sort of that lactic acid, lactate burn, you don't feel it as quickly. You don't get as breathless or fatigued as quickly. And it also translates to better mental resilience because you're not as affected by that discomfort of CO2 rising and acidity levels rising. So it makes you a little bit more resilient. It makes you able to perform longer and more efficiently. And I think it also, I just lost my last thought.
No, no,
I
no,
just
no.
lost it. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's all right. Maybe let me interject a few things, and maybe you'll find your
Sure.
thought again.
Sure.
So first of all, just to add to a list of researchers that I think they were based on my little research. There were other Soviet scientists that were researching this. There's one guy that I consider him crazy, but when I say crazy, you have to understand I love crazy people, and I always think I'm crazy. And again, it takes, yeah, you're right. I mean, you could be crazy, but why? Why are we thinking somebody's crazy? Anyway, there's this guy who sounds crazy. His name is, and he has a really funny name in Russian too. It's Professor Neumivakin. If you
Okay.
translate that last name literally, it means somebody who doesn't wash himself. So it's like a dirty guy. So, so this guy, and when you first listen to him, it's like he sounds completely like, at first sight, he sounds like some very unscientific, but his story is but when you start listening, there's some stuff that's like, I'm not sure, but there's some stuff, what? He got it long time ago. He got some stuff that people are now saying is the thing.
Mm.
Uh, he was diagnosed, like I think like Buteyko maybe. He was diagnosed with something. Doctor just gave up on him. I forgot exactly what he had, and he just was desperate, and he just went, and he was like swimming in like icy water and experimenting because he had nothing to lose. And also he was also a doctor. He was a professor. He was a professor of like for the astronauts. Like
Mm.
his mission was, he was one of the very smart people who were selected by the government to develop the program for the astronauts to survive. So there was medicine for the astronauts. So he combined that knowledge with his own experience and stuff, and he came up with a lot of the same stuff. And he had this whole thing about the CO2. He said, "Listen, we used to thinking CO2 is bad, but it's actually good." And he said, "Look, it helps you. It when your body senses a lot of CO2, it dilates. So the body has to react. It has to adapt, right? So how does it adapt? It says, oh my God, we need more oxygen, right? So it dilates the blood vessels,
Blood
right?
vessel.
It
Mm-hmm.
CO2 helps. It helps take the oxygen from hemoglobin to tissues.
Right.
Then he talks about acidity. I exactly forgot everything, but he talks about all this stuff, how so many benefits.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
another
I
point,
mean, that's the main. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Mm-hmm.
and then another real quick before I forget, also is along the path of less is more, which is
Mm-hmm.
something that you touched on. There's a concept of hormesis. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, right?
Yes,
Hormesis.
hormesis. Perfect. Perfect.
This
Yep.
is another concept I love, where a little bit of a bad is good. Like less
Yes.
is more, bad is good.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so hypoxic training is a form of hormetic stress,
there we
actually,
go.
in
There we
short
go.
bursts, not to
Right.
hold your breath until you kill yourself,
Right.
right? Short bursts of hypoxia have this positive adaptive response in the body, for
Right.
sure.
Again, there's a pattern across everything, across food, across exercise, where a lot of chronic stress, like if you constantly killing yourself, that's probably going to kill you eventually. But if you
Yeah.
just kill yourself a little bit, if you cause a little bit of pain, that's probably going to be better. Why? Because your body is going to adapt.
Yes.
And another thing that's now being a very popular topic is mitochondria,
Yes.
right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of like your mitochondria is the one that's supposed to produce energy, and when you
Hmm.
deprive yourself of oxygen in this case, uh, the mitochondria is like, oh, we got to do something. So we got to
Hmm.
adapt. We got to become better. Again, I'm simply oversimplifying this, but that's
But
another.
it's spot on. And I think you're right. These are two hot topics right now. Hormetic stress and mitochondrial health, I think, are the topics of the decade with longevity for sure. Like everyone's talking about them. And breathing really plays a key role here. So, there's an epidemic of sort of dysfunctional breathing, let's call it. And that could be biomechanical, like people structurally are not getting their breath in an effective way. They're not using their muscles properly and they need some kind of re-education. Or it can be this blood gas issue where they're very sensitive to CO2. How does someone get so sensitive to their own CO2? Is they have years or decades of poor breathing habits. Maybe they're breathing with an open mouth. Maybe they're breathing very shallowly. Maybe they're breathing too many breaths per minute. They're over breathing as opposed to less breathing.
Mhm.
And so they're constantly blowing off too much CO2, and their kidneys start to dump all the bicarbonate from their body, all this buffering system, because this person is too alkaline. And so the body doesn't need to buffer because there's no acidity happening. And then when that person starts to correct their breathing or intensify their movement and CO2 starts to build up, suddenly they cannot tolerate that feeling. They feel like they're suffocating. They feel like they're out of breath immediately. So they start to develop exercise intolerance and all these other things. And what happens is what you said, the Bohr effect, right? When CO2 rises in the body, it sends a signal to the red blood cells to release oxygen to the tissues. So this person who's in chronic hyperventilation, chronic dysfunctional breathing, their body's not getting that signal because there's not enough CO2 in the body to release the oxygen. And so you'll find with people with things like chronic fatigue or ME or a lot of these autoimmune issues that have a fatigue issue associated with them, they're not getting sufficient oxygen to the mitochondria to produce energy in the first place. And so really, it might not be the only thing, but you really have to address their breathing and get it more functional again in conjunction with whatever else they're doing, diet and all these other things.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second just to clarify a couple of things. So remind me, what is bicarbonate? You said your kidneys get rid of bicarbonate.
Yeah, so think about if your body gets too acidic, your blood doesn't like it, you need to have something in the body to buffer it, right? To make it more alkaline again.
Right.
So bicarbonate is this thing that alkalizes the system more. But if
Right.
you're already too alkaline, your body's going to dump the buffering system because it doesn't need it. And then when you do need it again, your body's not producing enough. You lost your system. You're malcalibrated. You're not calibrated properly,
Right.
right?
So let
So you
me.
have to recalibrate.
Okay. Yeah. So let me just because I was I have a little bit of a science background, a lot of a science background actually, but just for the sake but I was a little bit slow there, so let me recap for the sake of people who are not into science. So buffering means if you're like your blood, like you said, I'm going to repeat, right? It tries to preserve its state, right? So if you try to make it acidic, it tries to go back to being alkaline, which is the opposite of acidic, right? And vice versa. So buffering is what allows it to preserve this homeostasis, right? Go back to the same. Okay, good. So
You
just to
said
make
it
sure.
better than me. You said it better than I did.
That's a big compliment. I'm still working on communication. I'm learning from you actually. You have very good energy. I
Oh,
mean, I'm sure you know, but I just had to say that. That's
thank you
very
very
important.
much. Now you're going into the woo-woo phase, Dimitri. You're talking energy now. See? You have it in you too. I knew it.
The crazy scientist, right? Okay, cool. So we covered a little bit of this sort of the science behind this. So let's say it's all right. So we are athletes, we're judokas, and we want to improve ourselves, and we want to be the champions, and we want to be smart about our training. And I've come to believe that if we incorporate something that's at our disposal all the time, which is that incorporating breathing into our training, I have a hunch that's going to be very, very good, and it's going to just make us exponentially better.
Mm,
And
yeah,
we're gonna be Olympic champions.
for
So
sure.
tell me more like practical things. I think we're talking about incorporating breath holding in with our exercise. Uh, that's kind of becoming clear. That's the idea. But maybe you can give be a little bit more specific and specific guidelines. And before we do this, we have a special guest in our program today. This is Carmen.
Oh, what's
Carmen,
your
this is
name,
Carmen.
sweetie?
What's your name, sweetie?
Carmen.
Carmen?
Yeah. She's a
Oh, so nice to meet you. Hello.
she's a judo champion. She's aiming for the Olympics.
Awesome. How old are you?
8.5.
8.5. Awesome. And how are you liking judo?
It's really fun because I like going to tournaments.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, and that's actually, now she reminds me. So with all that I just said, we try to go over that, and then we're going to try to see how do we differentiate for kids
Sure.
as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
adults. So that's a lot of stuff. So
It's a
let's
lot of
go into
stuff.
that.
Okay. Okay. So I think two big things to remember. There's sort of two buckets, right? You have your daily functional breathing, which is part of your everyday training, and then you have more of your like judo and sports related breathing. So I think there's two different things to talk about. So daily functional breathing is even easier, right? This is developing more awareness of how you're breathing during the day, just noticing, am I breathing through my nose or through my mouth? Is there a point during the day where my mouth is hanging open? If so, practice getting your mouth closed. It's really important, right? It sets a good habit. You're setting the daily habit so that you don't have to think about it later. Are you holding your breath sometimes during the day? So there's a difference between unconscious and conscious breath holds, right? When we practice breath holds, we're making a conscious decision to do it for a specific adaptation that we're trying to create. But some people are going through their day just subconsciously holding their breath, especially when you spend a lot of time on the computer. There's even studies that show that too much screen time starts to impact negatively the respiratory system, where people are unconsciously holding their breath, they don't even realize it. And so they're depriving their brain, their hearts, their organs of valuable oxygen during the day. So noticing your breath is a critical part of your day, just for daily functional breathing, and that will translate into everything else that you do. So noticing your breath. Are you breathing? Breathing through your nose. And then, a couple times during the day, really dropping down your respiratory rate to maybe 6 breaths per minute. This is awesome for rest, recovery, for proper heart rate variability, for resilience, for adaptation, for encouraging good sleep, for helping with growth, development, memory, cognition, all those things that happen when we rest and rejuvenate our body. Good for injury prevention, all those things, great for focus and concentration. So I always have all my students, regardless of what they're doing, at least at the very minimum, create a nighttime practice before bed where maybe 10, 15 minutes, they're breathing at 6 breaths per minute. I usually have them lie on their back with their legs up on their wall, so they're also getting like good lymphatic drainage. They're bringing all the fluid back to the heart. They're really relaxed, and I have them breathe in for 4 and out for 6. So it's a really simple practice. That's also something I would have you guys do as athletes at the end of practice, right? As part of your cool down, do a 5-minute breathing practice with everyone, breathing at 6 breaths per minute. I think it's an awesome way to end a session and to kind of get their nervous system back into parasympathetic mode and set them up for a good night's sleep. So that's a really easy thing that they can do throughout the day. So breath awareness, nasal breathing, slow it down a few times a day, and deepen it. Make sure you're not activating all of this other musculature in your body, right? You really want to get the rib cage to expand with your breath. So as I'm inhaling, I'm getting my ribs to expand laterally, and as I'm exhaling, I'm getting my ribs to relax. You want to make sure that diaphragm actually activates, right? So a lot of people are just breathing very shallowly. Go ahead.
Let me stop you there for a second, because when I think of diaphragm, I usually think I have like this image of the diaphragm going like up and down in my stomach.
Yeah.
So I always think of breathing with my stomach when I think of the diaphragm, as opposed to breathing with my chest. But now you said something a little bit different, which is trying to expand your ribs, right? Is that
So
contradicting
I
or
would
not?
ask you, Dimitri, when you're standing on 2 feet and you're in gravity and you have to stabilize your spine against gravity, I want to see how much you actually can expand your belly in and out. It's actually going to take effort and concentration to do that. So when we are either seated or standing and we have to support our spine, because you remember, your diaphragm is not just your main respiratory muscle. It's also a main muscle of your core and your spinal stabilization. I mean, that's the top lid of your core, with your pelvic floor, with your abdominal wall, and with your back muscles. You need your diaphragm to be engaging to stabilize and to coordinate movement. So you don't always want to be protruding the belly. Also, you can kind of fake breathing that way. But what's harder to fake is the expansion of the lower ribs, because your diaphragm, remember, connects up here into the rib cage. And so when it, okay, it's curved. When it flattens and descends, your ribs should flare laterally. They have nowhere else to go. If your ribs aren't moving, you're probably not getting good diaphragmatic activation. So when I'm lying on my back, I will say, let the belly rise and fall. Because now I don't have to stabilize my spine. My belly moves easily. But when I am standing up against gravity, when I'm vertical, I go for the ribs instead. I want to feel not up here, down here, right?
Gotcha.
Deepening the breath into the lower body, getting the ribs to move, getting the diaphragm to descend and ascend. So, you know, that's even a great exercise to do with your athletes. You know, you can take just a few breaths in the beginning of class just to get their hands on their ribs with a little bit of inward pressure and just have them feel that movement. And they don't have to do it for long, maybe 5 or 6 breaths, just to have a little bit of a sense of that awareness of deepening the breath. And then they go on to something else. So I think for training, it's nice to incorporate breathing into sort of the pre-performance or the pre-practice, right? So maybe you guys are, I'm assuming that your warm-up looks a little something like running around, maybe high knees, maybe kicking your butt, maybe push-ups, you know, like body weight exercises. Maybe you're going across the mat back and forth, doing whatever you're doing. You can start to incorporate like mini breath holds into it, right? So, okay, we're running around, everyone's jogging around the room. Okay, keep running, but take a normal quiet breath in and out through your nose. Pinch your nose and hold. Try to hold your breath for the next 10 paces. Okay, release your nose, get control of your breath right away. Keep your lips closed, right? And you just incorporate it. Give them 30 seconds of rest. Everyone keeps running. Okay, let's go again. Take a normal breath in and out through your nose. Pinch your nose. Run 10 paces. Okay, release your nose. Keep running, but get control of your breath right away. Lips closed. So you can play little games like that with them, and it just encourages them to start to get a little taste of the discomfort of the CO2 building up, and also gets a little bit more oxygen to the muscles where they're going to be needing it for their sport that they're about to practice, right? So you can do like fun things like that with them. I'm assuming everyone that comes to the dojo is relatively healthy, right? So you can play around with
Yeah,
them pretty well.
yeah, of course. But let me ask you real quick though. Is there so not only everybody's healthy, and of course I would warn people like, listen, if you have a problem, let me know, or let's adjust. Uh, but personally, me and there's also a couple of other people. They kind of tend to get like obsessed with things. Like we're like over like when it comes to this stuff, we're like overachievers. We're like we try to push ourselves. Uh, should we be worried about too much? I mean, I know
Yes.
we're not gonna, you know, it's not like I'm gonna make myself pass out either. I know I'm not gonna make myself pass out, but I will actually hold my breath to the point where like I'll feel like weakness in my muscles. So
Yeah.
I do that because I say, you know what, let me see how long I can do it. You know, let me like break the record kind of thing. Is that bad?
Right. It's not bad. I wouldn't jump right into it. Just like with anything, you want to warm up into it. So when I do strong breath holds with my athletes, I always have them do some smaller breath holds first to warm it up. Short ones that I know are easy for them, 5, 10 seconds, or you progress it. Okay, hold it for 10 seconds. Okay, take a break. Okay, hold it for 15 seconds. Okay, take a break. Hold it for 20. You can keep progressing incrementally. And then it's kind of nice to do it that way in the group, because then I always say, okay, 25 seconds or whatever your limit is. You know, give people the option to tap out early. Don't force people to hold it longer than they can. Let them ease into it. It can be very uncomfortable to hold your breath during movement. It's an intense type of thing to be doing. So always warm up into it. Shorter breath holds first, and then you might throw in 1, 2, 3 maximum breath holds. What would that look like? In the case of being in the dojo, you might incorporate it with squats or push-ups is a fun way to do it, right? You say, okay, guys, we're gonna go for a maximum breath hold, but we're gonna do it with our movement. Take a normal breath in and out, pinch your nose, and just start doing body weight squats. Good form, not as fast as you can, not like a turtle, just like a normal speed. Keep holding your breath. When you can't hold your breath any longer, stop squatting, release your nose, get control of your breathing right away. Get control of your breathing right away. If they have to gasp for breath, the exercise was pointless, right? The whole point is to create this dichotomy between being very stressed and then being immediately relaxed and in control. You're building up this resilience. It's like nervous system conditioning when you're practicing these breath holds. So you push it to your limit and then you get control immediately. Slow down the inhale. Can you slow down the inhale? Deepen the inhale. Okay, can you even slow down the exhale even more? Get yourself back into a calm state. Bring that sense of safety back to your nervous system, right? The more we slow down our exhale, the more it starts to stimulate that parasympathetic response, that rest and digest, sends a signal of safety to the brain. We know we're okay. We know we're in control. So that's kind of how you go with it. And you don't have to do a million maximum breath holds, Dimitri. You know, the research shows like 3 to 5 is really where you get the optimal benefit. When you start doing more than 5 really strong breath holds, you get kind of diminishing returns on it, honestly.
3 to 5 per hour, per day, per training?
I would say for someone like you, a maniac like you, maybe twice a day, but once a day is more than enough, right? So what are some of the benefits of those max breath holds besides the CO2 is that you get that temporary release from the spleen, right? When you start practicing breath holds consistently, your spleen gets the message to release more red blood cells into the bloodstream. And so what do more red blood cells equate to? It equates to more oxygen carrying capacity, right? So this is almost like doping, like artificially doping to get more oxygen in the system, right? So your spleen pushes out more red blood cells. It's not permanent, it's temporary. But the research shows different things, that extra oxygen carrying capacity can last anywhere between 10 to 60 minutes, which is why it's kind of nice to throw in a few right before you start training. So you have that little bit of extra juice, that little bit more oxygen carrying capacity. When you hold your breath repetitively, you also release EPO from the kidneys. So you know EPO, erythropoietin, you know EPO? So if you know, like a lot of the Tour de France guys, they artificially dope with EPO, and that's what a lot of them get caught doing, right? For performance enhancement. But our bodies also naturally produce this hormone.
Okay.
And EPO is a hormone that is released from your kidneys. It acts on your bone marrow to produce brand new red blood cells. It sends a signal to your bone marrow that says, start to make new red blood cells so that we can replenish the old ones and put new red blood cells into the system. This process takes a few days though for people. Like it's not an instant thing. It can take 3 to 4 days. But when you're practicing those strong breath holds consistently, the idea is that you're keeping this flow of this signal of erythropoietin going to the bone marrow consistently enough that you're replenishing your red blood cells more often. And so you're getting, again, this improved oxygen carrying capacity. So I do think that consistent small bursts of breath holding have a lot of advantages and maybe some we don't even know yet. But 5 in a day is more than enough.
So five in a day, 5 sessions in a day, or 5 breath
I'd
holds?
say 5 max. So first of all,
5
I
max.
know you're thinking it's so easy. It's not easy, and
No,
a
no,
lot
I
of people
think
are going to be like, "Oh, I don't want to do it today." It's almost like doing a high intensity interval training, right? It's hard. You don't want to do it. And so 5 is more than enough. You know, the research that we have says you practice more than 5, you kind of get diminishing returns. You get so tired and you're not really getting much more benefit. So, you know, sometimes, like we were saying, less is more. So sometimes 5 is enough.
When I run, it hurts like a dot. Like,
Oh, okay. So she keeps on trying to get this answer to this question. Nobody can answer this. Maybe you can. I don't know if you've experienced this. I have experienced this as a kid a lot. Like if I start running, especially after I eat, I would have. Let me finish and then you explain. I would have like a pain on the side. It's very common, and I still have it as an adult, and sometimes, but not as much. Now she has similar thing, but it's not on the side. It's like more in the middle, or sometimes it shifts to different places.
when I eat, it happens, but when I don't eat, it happens too. Like
Right.
it's
So
So
it's
it
not
doesn't
related to if you're eating or not. And where do you feel the pain? You feel the pain in the middle of your belly?
sometimes like on the side, but middle side, or sometimes like the side. Like, well,
What's it feel like?
it's like it hurts a little bit. Like it says to me like to stop and breathe, but
And it's really interesting because like my first reaction is to say it's lack of training. But the thing is, like, sometimes she'll go, like today she went for many rounds of randori and she was fine. But then it's like something that's, or like she'll run, but then it's something like even walking. We're just walking in the park and then she say it hurts. You know, it's like weird.
So I don't know if it's feeling like your diaphragm is cramping. I mean, that's how I remember it. As a kid, we used to say when we were running, we call it a stitch in America. We used to say, oh, I have a stitch in my side. I don't know why we called it that. But I used to get this a lot as a kid too. And so there's a few different things that come to my mind of why that might be happening. So Carmen, you're still growing into your body, right? And your body is changing a lot. And you're just building muscle and your skeleton is just kind of trying to find its shape that it's going to take on as you grow into a woman. And so I think that some of it is a little bit of adjustment pains, like your body is trying to take on so many new things and maybe it's not internally quite as strong enough yet as you want it to be to do the things that you're doing, even though I know you're super, but you're still building strength. And what you find with a lot of kids as they're growing, it takes us time to find our proper posture. And what you find, I'll share a research article with you, just remind me. There was a study done, and it was mostly on, I think, high school kids, but they took children athletes. They took like elementary school, middle school, high school, and college students. And they found, and it was a pretty big study, it was a few thousand kids that they studied. And they found that dysfunctional breathing was the norm, not the exception, meaning that like 90% of the students, these athletic students, were not using their diaphragm correctly. There was some kind of mechanical dysfunction, not bad, they just needed some re-education on how to breathe. There was some mechanical dysfunction where they weren't activating their diaphragm properly, and this could cause either muscle pain or maybe low back pain. You know, it could cause pain in different areas and even affect how they're generating power, how they're generating force, you know, all those different things, because the biomechanics are important. But with younger people, it takes them a while to grow into it. And I think you work with it the best you can right now. So Carmen, I think just doing some simple diaphragmatic breathing and some of the exercises that maybe your dad is going to start to incorporate into the dojo is going to help. And we'll see. Let's see if maybe getting your diaphragm to activate differently starts to heal it. You'll have to keep me updated. Maybe I'll give you a little progression and you can keep me updated on if it works for you or not. It'll be a little private experiment that we do.
Maybe you guys can become friends, and you teach her breathing, and she'll teach you judo.
Oh, awesome. Cool.
We just
Awesome.
we just went to a tournament on Saturday, and Carmen did a couple of things that there was a bunch of senseis there, a bunch of different clubs, and some of those senseis said, "Wow, this is not even we haven't even seen many adults do those kind of things."
Whoa. What a compliment. How many years have you been practicing judo, Carmen?
when I started when I was 2 or 3.
Oh my God, you're an expert.
We're a judo family, you know. So my kid, I did not do judo as a kid, unfortunately. I was athletic, and
My sister, my brother, and my 2 sisters and my brother, he was watching. He was saying, I don't like judo, and he was starting. He liked it, and then he started.
exactly.
Sweet.
And then he broke his leg.
Well, you don't have to tell all my secrets. Come on.
But he's healed up now, right? I bet he's stronger than ever now.
But I was really sad because I wanted to, because he couldn't go to everything with he couldn't walk well. He needed those things.
But I still came to the dojo. Do you still remember?
No,
how I came to the dojo jumping on one foot? I'm still teaching.
Well, you know, this is another point of doing the breath holds is great during rehabilitation so you don't lose all of your cardiorespiratory function, right? So your
Maybe.
athletes who get injured, if they're bedridden or one of their limbs is not that usable, they can practice their breathing and still try to maintain some of that performance, even though they're not able to practice their skills. You know, the breathing can help at least keep that cardiorespiratory aspect on point.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm gonna, okay, bye.
Bye, Carmen.
Maybe she'll be back. We'll see. I think she'll be back. I think she liked you.
Oh, she's so sweet.
So real quick, if it's the same, we don't have to go into this, but is there, from everything you said, there was so much good information, but is there anything that would be different with the kids, or is it pretty much the same?
I think it's pretty much the same. You know, I wouldn't push them to the extreme with the breath holds. Let them go. Make it fun for them. Don't be militant about it. Make it fun for them. They get bored doing slow breathing on the ground. It's kind of boring for them. So you have to make it more fun. I think even if you just keep them walking. Okay, kids, get your hands on your ribs with a little inward pressure. And now as we're walking, I just want you to breathe in for a count of 4. Breathe out for a count of 4. And I want you to feel your ribs expanding on your inhale. And I want you to feel your ribs deflating on your exhale. You know, maybe as opposed to lying on the floor and breathing, which could be a little bit boring for them, keep them moving. So even for the cool down, just have them walk and breathing slowly and deeply in and out through the nose. Get their ribs to expand and deflate, expand and deflate. I think it'd be fun. But you could definitely put in the breath holds for their warm-up. I think they might like it. Work to the kids' tolerance, though. If any of them are a little bit anxious or have any kind of panic at all or fear, just work to their tolerance. If they're freaking out, don't push them. But, you know, I was saying to you when I spoke to you earlier, Dimitri, that kids are natural breath holders, right? What kids who go swimming, they love to hold their breath. They love to have breath holding competitions to see who can stay underwater the longest. And, you know, as humans, as mammals, we have something called the mammalian diving reflex, which means that when our face in particular, when our mouth and nose are immersed in water, there's all these physiological changes that happen in the body to prepare us to hold our breath for a long period of time. And so the heart rate really slows down. The blood gets shunted from the periphery and starts to protect the organs. You get more blood to the lungs, to the heart, to the internal organs, to the brain to protect your organs. And you get that release from the spleen, right? More red blood cells start to get released from the spleen. So it's really interesting. You know, this is a little bit separate, but there's sort of a native tribe, an indigenous people, I think right outside of Indonesia. I think they're called the Bajau tribe or something like that. And they are born and they die on their boats. They're like without country. They live on boats in the water outside of Indonesia. And they are spear fishermen. They hunt in the ocean. And these people can naturally hold their breath for about 13 minutes underwater, unassisted, no oxygen. And when they've studied them, it shows that their spleen is maybe twice the size of a normal human's. So they have been doing this for so many generations that their spleen has adapted to that lifestyle. So it's really interesting. So they're a perfect example of how they have taken this mammalian diving reflex that we all have, but they've kind of taken it to the next level. So I think the breath holding is really safe and fun for kids. But like I said, don't be too serious with it. Make it fun for them.
You know that there's sirens.
What?
The sirens.
Oh, the sirens. The
sirens, like the mermaids, right?
Mermaids. They're human mermaids that do that, and
the professional mermaids.
Yeah, they're professional.
I've seen them. Yeah, they can hold their breath for a long time too, for sure. For sure. They have to. Yep.
That's cool. Yeah. I was gonna ask something, and then the mermaids just wiped my brain. So speaking of, all right. So speaking of water, and mermaids and all that, what do you think about Wim Hof? Because that's cold exposure, but it also has to do with the breath. To me personally, again, I haven't quite opened my mind to Wim Hof because the over breathing that he does in the beginning, that's, I'm a little bit prejudice against that, but maybe I have to change that too. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm also a little prejudiced against it. So, I've actually practiced a lot of Wim Hof. I've taken a lot of the trainings, and a lot of my colleagues teach both Oxygen Advantage and Wim Hof. So I do have some insight here. So remember I said there's different types of breath holding, and the type of breath holding we do is hypoxic, low oxygen, hypercapnic, high CO2. Wim Hof breath holds are hypoxic, low oxygen, hypocapnic, low CO2. So his style of breathing dumps all the CO2. Now, what we find anecdotally, it has its benefits, that breath hold, but I don't think of it as something for sports performance, honestly, because you're not getting that CO2 tolerance piece. And what we have found anecdotally now
is because of all the hyperventilation
Yes.
that
Yes.
prior to holding. Does he hold his breath also on the exhale?
Yeah. So they do about 20 or 30 big breaths. They blow off all the CO2 so that their mind doesn't get the warning signal. That's why people who practice Wim Hof can hold their breath for 4 or 5 minutes, because they don't get the warning bells. They're not going into acidity, right? So you do those. So you blew off all the CO2, and now people hold their breath 4, 5, 6 minutes. The CO2 doesn't even recover during the breath hold. And then they go into another round, blowing off more CO2, and then a long breath hold. The CO2 is never recovering. So what I find is with really elite people, they can practice this for certain things. Some people like to do it for positive immune response. They find that it helps their immune system. But anybody who is already sensitive to CO2 and has very poor CO2 tolerance, when they tend to practice these hyperventilation techniques, their CO2 tolerance gets worse. And it really negatively impacts their performance, their resilience, their experience of anxiety, of stress. So I don't recommend it. The people who usually find me and work with me have special needs, and we don't do that. We're trying to correct their breathing and make them more tolerant to CO2, and the reduced breathing, the less breathing, is way more beneficial for them and way more functional long-term. So I don't want to say anything negative about Wim Hof. There's definitely a time and place for it. But what I find is people who practice it for a long time often start to see, oh, wow, it's starting to impact other aspects of my life, maybe not as optimally as I had hoped.
Well, whatever it is, I thank you very much for explaining this, because before it was like, well, there's different. I like to understand the reason behind things, you know, and you understand the explanation of hypercapnic versus hypocapnic. That made a lot
Hypocapnic,
of
yeah.
sense. Yes.
Yeah.
So how about are there any benefits to holding the breath on the inhale that are not covered by the holding the breath on the exhale?
You can do it. You know, it's more challenging on the exhale, and you just get the benefits faster. So, you know, people who are training free diving, right? So like the mermaids, people who train like that, when they practice their breath holds, they'll often hold on the inhale, because you would never go underwater on an exhale. It doesn't make sense. You want your lungs to be filled, right? So when they practice on dry land, right, they'll take as big of an inhale as they can and hold their breath. So there can be benefits to that too. And you're definitely going to work on your CO2 tolerance. Why? Because you're not taking that initial exhale to blow off some of the CO2. But because your lungs are filled with air, this kind of dispersal, this exchange of CO2 and O2 is so much slower, because there's so much more oxygen in the lungs still that has to disperse into the blood, and the CO2 has to come into the lungs. Whereas if I take my exhale, the lungs are more condensed already, and this process is happening much faster. So in terms of adaptation for sports, we tend to practice that way, because think about a sport like judo. There's so much power involved. There's so much endurance. It's such high intensity, and you guys are gassing out fast, right? Like you don't have that many minutes before you're exhausted, right? Grappling is a really exhaustive sport, and that exhaustion is CO2 rising in the body, the muscles getting more acidic, not being able to handle the acidity, you know, and you just like have to like give up and take a break. So I just feel like this type of breath hold trains you better for your sport. And to take it to the next level, actually, we even have something called a sports mask that we use. And sometimes we train this way. So it's a mask It's a silicone mask. It covers the nose and the mouth. And then there's 3 settings on it, low, medium, and high. And so this is another way to add even more resistance to the breathing and even more CO2 tolerance. So you're training with this mask on, and it's kind of pooling the CO2 around your nose and your mouth so that it's even trickier to recover. So you're pushing the intensity, and then you're trying to get control of your breathing, but it's such the hole is so small that it's really reducing how much oxygen you can get in, but more importantly, it's really reducing how much CO2 you are able to blow off. So you're really building up CO2 tolerance with this thing.
Yeah,
But
that's
it's
awesome.
intense.
That's interesting. There's also high altitude training. I heard about all this. Personally, I'm kind of like a minimalist in everything, so I try to say,
Yes.
let me, I don't want to get fancy. Whenever I see people get fancy, like fancy equipment, fancy the mask, this and that, or I have to pay a lot of money. I'm like, listen, it kind of takes a little bit of the value out of it.
I agree with you. I'm very similar. I don't like a lot of equipment. I'm not a tech person. I don't like all the biohacking devices. I don't do it. I will say this, Dimitri, because you said high altitude training. So the whole idea behind Oxygen Advantage, a whole component of our work is this simulation of high altitude training. And so Patrick, when he created this work, he kind of had the idea, can we train high altitude at sea level using the hypoxic techniques, basically? And so I'll try to find those studies for you too. I can't think of the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there is a study that shows that doing those strong breath holds creates a level of hypoxia that's very similar to being something like maybe 4,000 meters up or something like that, 2,000 meters up. I'll get the exact numbers for you, but he calls it bringing the mountain to you, right? So like if you can't go train at altitude, this is sort of the second best thing. You can be at sea level practicing this hypoxic sort of training.
And by the way, I think there's semi-anecdotal evidence that people that live in high altitudes tend to live longer. That could be because of the breathing, or could be because of the lifestyle, or a combination.
Yeah, I hear really mixed results. I think some of these mountainous regions, you have a lot of longevity, and I think that's because there's so much natural movement built into the day, and you get more of a workout. You're not so sedentary. But I think too high of an altitude also puts a lot of stress on the heart over time. So I think there's a little bit of a trade-off. I'll try to get the statistics for you on that as well. I think there's it can go either way, and there's other factors that kind of play in.
Are there any populations on Earth that actually you would consider living in too high of an altitude?
I just remember listening to some respiratory researcher one time, and he had some stats that like a lot of the Andean populations, a lot of people in the Andes down in South America, that they typically die of some kind of cardiovascular issue just from being at altitude too long. Like the heart either gets enlarged, too enlarged, or something like that. But I don't want to misspeak. I just remember it very vaguely, something like that. And it landed with me because at the time I had already been teaching Oxygen Advantage. And I also had the idea, oh, high altitude, right, that must be a great way to live. But I think what we were saying is probably true. Like smaller doses is probably better. Maybe too much is too much.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'd have to look at the numbers for you better to give you a clearer answer.
One more question. Sorry to bombard you with questions. You're so good.
Okay.
You're so good at explaining this. Is there any? I heard some stuff that also how how this combines, this breathing, how it combines with fasting.
Yeah.
Have you heard any of that? Can you speak to that a little bit?
How do you mean? You mean in terms of pH, maybe?
Well, so one thing I heard, I think, is actually it will help you. Like if fasting is another good thing, but it's not easy. And I think I heard somebody say like, okay, if you practice this holding your breath as you're fasting, that will actually help you survive. And I forgot the scientific explanation of that. Something had to do maybe with the CO2. And maybe
It's interesting.
yeah, and maybe I heard something else like like sometimes the combined effects of things, they actually exponentially help each other. Like if you just exercise, that's good. If you just fast, it's good. If you exercise and fast, that's even better. And now I'm thinking, well, what if you exercise, fast, and breath hold? I mean,
No, there's no deficit to it. I mean, I don't see it as a contraindication. I mean, it's interesting. So the max breath holds are a stressor, right? It's a hormetic stress, like we were
yeah.
saying. And so I think, you know how when you're too sedentary, sometimes you're more hungry. You feel like you have to nibble constantly, like your body's not regulating properly.
Mhm.
But if you go to the gym and work out, notice you're never hungry right after your workout, right? The
Right, right,
endorphins are still rushing. It takes a while to get hungry. You need like a half hour sometimes to actually feel that hunger response because it's been shunted by the other hormones that are being released. And so I do think that there could be something like if you're getting used to fasting and you're uncomfortable with it and you are used to doing breath holds, maybe the stressors that they get released by the breath hold, maybe it shunts that hunger signal a little bit.
I
It could
think
be.
I think I think I'm remembering what this is about. So you know how when you fast, what happens is your body has to switch modes, sort of, so to speak, right? You have to, and some people who are not used to it, their body just doesn't know how to switch. You know this whole ketosis thing, right? Right? So your body, it's not like your body. Somebody explained it really good. It's not like you skip the meal. It's just you take the meal from different source. Instead of taking it from
Right.
outside, you take it from your own fat. But your body has to switch the mode, right? That's why sometimes you go hungry, 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 and then if you fall asleep hungry, next morning you wake up, you're actually not hungry because your body has
Right.
switched. And I
Right.
think I think what I read is that holding that breath, increasing that CO2, somehow it helps the body make that switch to that
I
mode.
think it has to do probably with the pH that we were talking about before, that
Hmm.
acid-base balance. I'm sure plays a big role in that.
Hmm.
And also because your breath directly hacks into your nervous system, your autonomic nervous system. So you're also literally changing your state with each breath hold. You know, you're changing where you fall on that spectrum
Hmm.
of your nervous system, of if you're really stressed, if you're really relaxed, or somewhere in the middle. So I think probably that combination of nervous system and whatever's happening with the acid base balance is affecting what you said. Like, are you using ketones or are you using glucose or whatever? You know, I do think there could be something there, but I just don't know the science well enough, Dimitri.
One more question. Do you know about nitric oxide?
What do you want to know?
Just, just, just real quick. I just learned about, like, I've completely ignored that, and I just recently heard about this. Actually, the Julia, the other breath person that I talked to, she talked about it a lot, but it's sort of news to me. So can you speak to this a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, my most popular video on my YouTube channel is about nitric oxide. So the body naturally produces nitric oxide in the body. It's an endogenous molecule that we produce in a bunch of different ways, right? It gets supposedly released from the inner lining of our blood vessels, from the endothelium. And so it plays a big role in our cardiovascular system. Nitric oxide is known as a major vasodilator. It really acts on the blood vessels.
Mhm.
Um, but you also produce a lot of endogenous nitric oxide in the paranasal sinuses and in the nasal cavity. And this is getting released all the time as we're nasal breathing. Because my understanding is that nitric oxide really gets released kind of by mechanical friction of either air passing over or from blood going through the blood vessels. So exercise releases nitric oxide, right? It
Mhm.
creates that vasodilatory response in the body. Um, but is specifically in regards to breathing, let's talk about that because that's what we're
Mhm.
talking about. So as we're nasal breathing during the day, we're producing nasal nitric oxide. As we breathe that nasal nitric oxide into the lungs, it is a bronchodilator. So it actually expands the bronchi, the breathing tubes. It's a vasodilator, so it actually brings more blood flow to the lungs, to the alveoli, to those
Mhm.
those little air sacs at the end of the respiratory tract that are responsible for gas exchange. And the most important thing that it does is it allows for this thing that we call lung perfusion, right? So we've got our respiratory tract, right? And it branches off into these little air sacs called alveoli.
Mhm.
That is the only place that gas exchange happens in the respiratory tract. You need those little air sacs to be working. They only work if they have access to oxygen, to air, and they only work if they have oxygen to a blood supply. They need both of those things to operate, right? There's about 6 million alveoli in your lungs, and you
Mhm.
want to have as many of them working as possible. But when we are standing in gravity, a lot of the blood is pooled in the lower lobes of the lungs. It's not totally covering all our alveoli. But when we breathe in the nasal nitric oxide, that gas helps to redisperse the blood more evenly throughout all the lungs, and it brings more blood supply to more alveoli. So in that way, nasal nitric oxide actually assists with better oxygen uptake and distribution. We're actually getting better gas exchange because of this gas that we produce in our nasal cavity. And this is why it's really important to breathe through the nose, because you don't produce it through the mouth like that. And that's why a lot of your athletes, if you have any athletes, maybe you don't in the dojo, but a lot of runners, for example, get exercise-induced asthma, right? They don't have asthma regularly, but when they start exercising, they do. And a lot of times you'll find it's because they default to mouth breathing too soon. And when you start to breathe in heavily through your mouth, there's no filter. That air is coming right in and hitting your respiratory tract. It's usually too cold or it's too dry. And it's causing a stress response in the body, which causes the airways, the bronchi, to close down, to constrict. It causes your blood vessels to close down and constrict. You're not getting good oxygen uptake. You're not getting good blood flow. So a very easy way to correct exercise-induced asthma is to teach people to breathe through their nose during exercise. And it really starts to self-correct. It's not easy. It's hard to switch if you're a mouth breather, but you do it over time.
It's easy but not easy, like everything. Easy but not easy.
Yes. Simple but not easy. Yeah.
Simple but there we go. How about humming? Have you heard about anything about it?
Yeah, so I mean, there's studies on it. It sounds ridiculous, but you know, this is an ancient yogic practice. This breathing technique they've been doing for however many hundreds of years. But the studies show that it can release up to 15 times more nitric oxide than just breathing normally. So it's a simple practice, and I teach my students to hum actually. It's kind of cool.
And how do you go like I guess inhale through your nose and just hum as long as possible? Is that a good?
Yeah, and the other benefit that comes from that is you learn to elongate your exhale really long. So some people who have a hard time elongating their exhale, if you allow them to do it as a hum, they can sometimes go up to 20 seconds with their exhale. And remember what I said earlier, when we extend the exhale, when we focus on the exhale, that down regulates the nervous system more. So we get more into our parasympathetic state, or more into our rest and digest. So it's a simple practice, but it's pretty powerful.
I tried it with the kids. Speaking of the kids, right? Because that's kind of fun. I said, let's see who can. Let's do a bumblebee, and let's see.
Bumblebee.
Let's see. Did you know that?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Whenever you associate it with animals with kids, it's more fun, and it does. They call it the bumblebee breath, and it sounds like bees.
And I said, let's see who can do bumblebee longer. Right? So it's cool. It's awesome, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's also fun with kids. If you turn it into a little bit of a game or a competition, I think it's fun for them too. Yeah. Did they like it?
I think so. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you have to be careful. You don't want them to like it too much, so it becomes a little circus.
I think it's a nice, I would put that bumblebee breath as part of their cool down, actually. I think it's a nice way to start to shift and down regulate the nervous system.
You know, another thing, I just thought about this. I think, I don't know if science is already there, but I think we're gonna discover that laughing is another, there's like so many like weird, like if you think about it, weird and like fun and just amazing stuff with yawning and laughing. What is that? Like, do people study that?
Well, I think, you know, there's this whole, have you ever heard of, what do they call it? This one guy, he calls it like laughing yoga or something. I gotta find the YouTube video for you. But basically you show up in the classroom and you kind of force it at first, and then eventually everyone's like, you know, like the whole room of 30 people, they're like big belly laughing, like and the more you do it, the more silly you get, you know? But I think it's proven how many like happy hormones are released through laughter. And there's also that communal engagement and that energetic exchange and sort of the quote unquote good vibes. I know you don't like this stuff, but the good vibes, right? Sharing the good vibes. You know, primates are a communal species, and humans, Homo sapiens, are primates. You know, we're not so different than our chimp relatives. So I think it's really important to have that exchange. I think something about having that exchange just makes us feel a sense of belonging, makes us feel a sense of safety. You know, we were talking about the nervous system. That laughter is also a way of engaging with people, which triggers something we call the ventral vagal response, right? So when we talk about our vagus nerve, which has so many implications in the body, it actually has a couple different branches. And one branch is the ventral vagal, which kind of innervates sort of the sensory organs, right? The eyes, the tongue, the ears. And when we can engage with people that we really like and feel that sense of belonging, it creates a sense of safety in the body. And allows us to feel more open, not so guarded. So we really start to open up and get out of that fight or flight response. And I think laughter is just a beautiful, simple way to bring people out of fight or flight into rest and relaxation. I mean, it really down regulates your nervous system, but I'm sure there's other things going on as well, for sure.
Okay. Sarah, thank you so much. This is awesome. I'm apologize for keeping you. I always say we're gonna do this. Oh, half an hour, and then I keep people for 2 hours.
Well, I
Especially,
hope it was useful, and I hope people get some value out of it. I feel like I've been talking a lot, but I hope some of it is clear and interesting.
I think I've kept you longer than usual because I'm like authentically interested, and your explanations are very good. And if you ever so kind, and if you're willing and able, let's do this more, and maybe we can even, like this time was like introduction, and maybe we can dive more into some stuff, and maybe we can even like, as we do what we do, maybe we have some ideas, and we can just like get together and like brainstorm and like share and maybe even like speculate, like we don't have to always say the disclaimer, oh, okay, you consult your doctor, okay, everybody understands this, but we can just speculate, well, what if, what if this, what if that, and maybe, experiment and share. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do it, and I actually love the work that you're doing, and I would be excited to actually try to come up with like a breathing protocol for the dojo, just to give you a little bit more guidance, just to see, and then it'd be nice for me also to get some real-time feedback, like, Dimitri, how is it working? Are they getting some benefit from it? Do you see improvements? What's the feedback from the kids? Are they getting like symptomatic changes? Are they performing better? It's how we learn. This is what experimentation is. Sometimes we don't have the answers until we try it. So I'm very open to that if you're open
Yeah.
to that.
Oh, yeah. Maybe you can come to the dojo one day.
Yeah,
You
I mean, I don't live that far. Yeah, so I'm about 2 hours outside of New York City now. How far are you from New York City?
Oh, we're very close. So Fairlawn. So big city next to us is Patterson.
Oh, Patterson, not far.
So
Well, I told you my boyfriend's a judoka. He's a third
yeah,
degree black belt. And
yeah,
so maybe we'll both drive down one day and he can play around a little bit and we can do some breathing or something.
cool. That would be awesome. Yes, let's
Yeah,
do
it'd be
that.
fun.
Keep in touch and do
Cool.
that. Okay, Tara. Thank
Awesome.
you very much.
Thank you so much. Nice to see you.
Arigato. Okay.
Arigato. Okay.
Good night.
Bye, Dimitri.
Bye.
Bye.